Dire Regulus here, welcome to the Dire Pirates. Today we will be navigating a theory about one of One Piece's strongest characters. And no, I'm not talking about Blackbeard, there's already amazing theories about his powers out there. In this video we're addressing the shadowy ruler that sits on the empty throne, the one that made Sabo lose his shit, the one and only Imu. The intro. Imu is a character who's only appeared a handful of times in One Piece so far, but their influence predates Luffy's adventure. Presumably a descendant of, if not an actual person from the Void Century, there's very little we know or even can assume about Imu. But then came swinging chapter 1060, when it introduced us to one of Imu's weapons, when they used it to delete the Leloucia Kingdom out of existence. Personally, I think that was our introduction to ancient weapon Uranus, but that's not what I'll be addressing here. Because Imu didn't just erase Leloucia Kingdom and Sabo because they were revolutionaries. No, in fact, he simply did it because none of them were subscribed to this channel. So just to be safe, go ahead and click on subscribe, hit that notification bell. The bell keeps Imu extra happy. So aside from terraforming great weapons, let me tell you what Imu's powers are, and more specifically, which devil fruit they have. And if I'm right, Imu's powers have been hinted to us as far back as volume 11, chapter 94 to be specific, which is the ending of Arlong Park. And that's because I think Imu has a Zoan type devil fruit. The fruit itself is from the Mushi Mushi series, meaning it's a bug type Zoan devil fruit. And the model is this.
Gotcha.
That's right, it's the Mushi Mushi no Mi model Den Den Mushi. The why. I know right now you may think it's crazy, but when you think about the few things we've seen Imu accomplish so far, it all ties together. The Den Den Mushi were inspired by a pseudoscientific concept that was explored in the 1800s. Around 1850, a French occultist called Jacques Toussaint Benoit tested a concept that he and his assistant Mr. Beat Chrétien dubbed the Bacillolinic Sympathetic Compass. It's basically a device that would allow people to send messages through snails, a kind of snail telegraph. The idea is that snails that would touch each other would theoretically create a telepathic link between themselves. So let's say you have a set of 24 snails linked to each other, one for each letter of the alphabet. You could technically send a message by stimulating each snail needed for each letter of your message. Whether the actual thing worked or not is irrelevant, because we know it is the inspiration that Oda took to create the Den Den Mushi. So the Den Den Mushi we all know all have some sort of telepathic link. The main thing that makes me believe that Imu is a Den Den Mushi is their ability to know everything. What's going on, where people are, who's talking to who. I don't see that being possible in any other way in the One Piece universe without being able to tap into the Den Den Mushi network. We just look at chapter 1060. How in the world would Imu know that Sabo, who's been on the run since the Reverie, would be hidden in Leloucia Kingdom? Isn't it also oddly convenient that the hit on Leloucia happens at the exact moment where Sabo takes the risk to contact the rest of the revolutionary army via what, I may ask? A Den Den Mushi. This also probably helps the world government a lot in figuring out where important devil fruits always are. And it would also explain the weak spots that Imu and the Gorosei by proxy seem to have. Think about it, what are the few places where the world government does not have influence? Skypiea, Wano, Zoo, and the Tontada Kingdom that doesn't act in correlation with Dressrosa. And one last one, newspapers. Skypiea's tech seems to have trended more towards dials, which we know can record audio via Brook's recording of Bink Sake with the Rumbar Pirates, and that would be instead of maybe going towards the Den Den Mushi technology. Wano, on the other hand, seems to use smart Tanishi, which are very similar to Den Den Mushi, but seem to operate on their own separate network. Then there's the Minks of Zoo and the Dwarves of the Tontada Kingdom that don't seem to use that technology at all. In the Minx's case, it seems to be more that they never came across that advancement, while in the Tontata's case is that it's known that they do simply release the snails back into the wild. Last but not least, the newspapers. Morgans controls what get printed in them, and they are delivered via seagulls. Morgans easily has access to Denden Mushi, so why doesn't he just do some type of radio show that would be broadcasted through them? Heck, projector Denden Mushis exist, so Morgans could even be the equivalent of a One Piece streamer. But he chooses not to and still relies on paper and birds. And as smart and informed as Morgans is, this makes me think that there's a reason he operates this way. He's probably aware of at least Emu's existence, or maybe that someone is at least checking everything behind the scenes.
I know everything.
So these elements of the One Piece world are outside of Emu's influence because of them existing outside of the Denden Mushi network. Denden Mushi have also been around for generations, so regardless how old Emu is, having a devil fruit based on them remains possible. Also notice how Emu's robe drags behind them as they move. That could be a nod to snails, who leave a trail of slime behind them when they move around. And that's one part of the symbolism. Denden Mushi have a very important feature that's all over the One Piece world on their shell. We can call it the golden ratio, the Fibonacci sequence, or just simply a swirl. Regardless of what you call it, it's been featured in One Piece for a very long time. And it's one of the main differences between Smile Devil Fruits and real Devil Fruits. There are no swirls on Smile Devil Fruits. And then there's the Vinsmoke kids, who all have a swirl, have all had their lineage factor messed with. And what's the only difference between the purity of a real Devil Fruit and a Smile Devil Fruit? It's the lineage factor, which is the reason Smile Devil Fruits are not a sure shot. And this golden ratio is not only everywhere in One Piece, Oda even signs his name with it. If that's not a sign of the swirl pattern being a big thing, I don't know what is. So it would make a lot of sense for the endgame villain to be related to such an important symbol. Let's also not forget that dials are hugely due for a comeback and that they almost all have the golden ratio on them. All I'm saying here is that Emu's Denden Mushi Zoan will allow them to tap into the lineage factor realm, which is symbolized by the golden ratio. More on that in the next section, which is Emu's possible powers. Now, I won't dwell on the possible hockey abilities that Emu might be able to pull off. There's no evidence to them yet, but let's just assume that they're going to be on the higher end of what we've seen. I'm more interested in exploring the powers that would be related to the Denden Mushi side of things. On a basic level, a defensive ability that could be introduced is Snail Slime. What's interesting with Snail Slime is that there's two kinds. One of them is an adhesive that allows the snail to stick to different surfaces. The other one is the one that allows the snail to travel via adhesive locomotion, what we call the slime trail. The slime trail also coats the snail's body, protecting it from different obstacles, as sharp as blades. With swords being as predominant as they are in the One Piece universe, it would be a very interesting defensive ability to give to Emu, making him impervious to blades themselves. But what would be even cooler is where this Devil Fruit's awakening could go. Remember that stuff, how the golden ratio is linked to the whole concept of lineage factors, which are the secret ingredient of Devil Fruits? One of the most fun aspects about the Denden Mushi is the fact that they kind of morph into whoever's communicating through them. What if the awakening associated with this species Devil Fruit would allow the user to tap into the lineage factor of anyone who's ever used the Denden Mushi network? This would mean that Emu can mimic the lineage factor of just about everyone we've seen, which means, in a way, their powers and abilities. Wouldn't that be a set of powers on par with the imaginative possibilities of the sun god Nika Devil Fruit that Luffy has? Then there's Emu's eyes, the famous spiral eyes. Mihawk, Caribou, Zunesha, even Projector Denden Mushis and others have them. I don't necessarily have a solid take myself yet on those special eyes, but needless to say, they'll probably be related to Emu's powers. If anything, I think One Piece Film Red might have a tiny hint. In the movie, Shanks can cancel the effects of the future sight aspect of observation hockey using his own hockey. Maybe people with spiral eyes could have their own advanced hockey ability. This could explain why Mihawk is able to be Shanks' rival. Maybe the ability allows him to counter Shanks' counter. Possibly that form of hockey is creating a fake foresight to the observation hockey user, making the opponent believe in a fake version of the incoming future. Or maybe something even crazier, akin what Itachi does with his Sharingan in Naruto and makes people hallucinate stuff. So that covers the powers, but if Emu is a snail, Oda probably got the idea somewhere. Which brings us to the mythological roots. We don't know yet if Emu is male, female, or other, but the mythological stories that could be parallels are giving me the impression that Emu will at least look like a woman. I found 4 Asian myths and 1 god that could possibly be inspirations for Emu. We're going to go over 2 of the myths, and the other 2 are kind of redundant, and then the god. The first is the Japanese myth of the Sazai Oni, which translates to shellfish ogre or shellfish demon. The most popular legend associated to it tells the story of pirates who save a drowning woman. Once on board though, the woman realizes that the pirates' motivations to save her were more lustful than noble. So that night they all take turns visiting her chambers against her will, but then karma swings back against them. Turns out the woman was actually a shape-shifted Sazai Oni, and she goes around the ship stealing away the family jewels of every pirate on board. Realizing what she's done, the men trade all the treasures they've accumulated to her in exchange for their precious back. In the original Japanese, it's a play on words because men's balls are often referred to as golden balls, so she traded gold for gold. So pirates, treasures, sea monsters, and word plays. It's all very One Piece. The second myth that could be an inspiration is from Javanese folklore. Now, Javanese folklore is interesting in itself because that's where you can find the story about a certain king called Jayabaya. It's something I've covered in one of my earliest videos, but basically he's often thought to be an inspiration for the figure of Joy Boy himself. But for now we're covering the story of Kyong Emas, which is part of the Panji story cycle, which features a legendary prince of the same name, Panji. Kyong Emas is the last of the 5 stories that compose this cycle. Its title translates to Golden Snail, and for once this one doesn't star Prince Panji. This one stars his wife, Princess Dewi Sekartaji. This story begins with an enemy king attempting to kidnap Princess Dewi to make her his wife. This plan, however, is intercepted by the god Batara Narada, who transforms Princess Dewi into a golden snail. He then tells her to drift along a river in order to find her husband again. But the princess is found by an old widow instead, who keeps her as a pet in a jar. So to pass time, the princess starts transforming into herself every day, makes food, cleans, does the chores while the old widow is away. One day, the old widow, wondering who's being so kind to her, catches the princess taking care of everything. So she decides to smash her shell, smash her jar, and that therefore liberates the princess from her curse. They live together in a good life until Prince Panji finds his wife again, and then they go back to the kingdom, bringing the old widow with her, offering her a great life. In the eastern side of the globe, this is a popular story to teach kids kindness and gratitude. There's even a big IMAX theater in Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, that's inspired by the snail's golden shell. The other 2 myths are the Korean tale of Uryongi Gaksi and the Thai story of Sang Tong. Both of them tell the story of a snail that can transform into a woman who is taken away from her husband, only for him to find her again in the end. And these 4 are stories I think may have inspired Oda for Emu, and the main reason I think Emu is a woman. But there's still one figure we have to look at who's male, and a god, before we keep moving on. That's Wayub, the Mayan god of misfortune, the man who sports a snail shell. Wayub is the god of the 5 unlucky days that happen at the end of the Mayan calendar year, which means that at each year they can kind of happen at any season given how the Mayan calendar is made. These are 5 days that were thought to create misfortune and uncertainty in people's lives. And those 5 days are also the Mayan answer to the leap year that we use. You know that thing that happens every 4 years? Like a reverie? The thing that Emu secretly lords over? With all these myths, gods, and tales in mind, let's keep on going to the clues that might tell us about Emu's backstory. One of the most imminent things to address in Emu's backstory is their probable ancient presence. And I was reminded of the most simple answer recently while watching a theory video on Emu by friend of the channel Prince of All Anime. Go check him out. That is Law's Ope Ope no Mi Devil Fruit. It's the simplest answer to Emu's long life, and the foreshadowing is there. The eternal youth operation that devil fruit can perform is what Doflamingo wants from Law in order to achieve his goals. Goals which, when you think about it, basically translate to wanting to be who Emu currently is. Doflamingo already knows about the Will of D, the Eternal Youth Surgery, and the Treasure of Marijois. I don't think it's off the table that he could know about Emu or at the very least suspect their existence. After all, Emu's own introduction is preceded by a monologue by Doflamingo in chapter 906. With that answered, I think that the myths that we looked at as possible inspiration are a clear indicator that Emu is some sort of noble that was captured and that probably liberated themselves during the Void Century. That is, unless the current time is when Emu is captive and they'll only consider themselves liberated once they introduce themselves to the world at large. And as far as which kingdom Emu might be from, there's only a few possibilities. First, simplest, plainest answer is Emu is from one of the 20 kingdoms that founded the world government. The second, more fun option is that Emu is part of one of the other kingdoms that was active at the time. So maybe A, Emu is from the ancient kingdom itself, which could imply a very tragic backstory, a very One Piece thing. Or B, Emu is from one of the other two very important civilizations of that era, the Long Arm tribe or the Long Leg tribe. It's an absolute possibility. After all, none of the shots of Emu that we've seen have shown us any clear indication of any proportions. Very importantly also, let's not forget that the Long Limb War happened right before the Void Century. What if Emu's tragedy happened there? Maybe they're the first long limb hybrid baby, which caused their exile. Okay, at this point I'm just spitballing, so let's wrap this up. Mini recap here is that Emu is one of the biggest challenges to Luffy's imagination and one of the biggest obstacles between him and his dreams. And that's by the simple virtue of being a Zoan Denden Mushi Devil Fruit user that's been around forever. And before we end this, I want to shout out one last friend of the crew, Doc Sake, who's been huge help with the reason you probably are here right now, the title and the thumbnail. Go check out his stuff. He has one of my favorite laugh tale theories. Also, don't forget to follow me on TikTok. There's a whole other branch of my content over there. It offers you a bunch of mini theories that are under 3 minutes long that you can watch on the go. Like and subscribe, but most of all, thanks for clicking. Thanks for watching.